On the 8th of August 1876, Princess Sophia Jinda Alexandrovna Dalip Singh was born into the Dalip Singh household at Elvedon Hall in Suffolk. The young child was to grow up to become an ambitious young woman who would involve herself with many important causes. But before she was able to carve out her own identity, she was born a princess, the daughter of Maharaja Dalip Singh, the last ruler of the Sikh Empire of Punjab. Dalip Singh inherited the Sikh Empire from his father, Ranjit Singh, at the age of 5. However, his coronation was followed by 2 Anglo-Sikh wars in 1845 and then again in 1848, resulting in a defeat for the Sikhs. In 1849, Punjab was annexed to British India, and the young Maharaja's property was seized. Dalip Singh was moved to a British camp in Fatehgarh, and in 1853, he was baptized into Christianity. The following year, he was sent to England. Dalip Singh quickly became Queen Victoria's favourite and was often seen at her side at many royal functions. In 1863, Dalip Singh purchased Elvedon Hall, a 17,000-acre estate located just a few miles from the town of Thetford in Norfolk. Over the years, Elvedon Hall was to become the site of many shooting parties with a host of distinguished guests, including the Prince of Wales. In 1864, the young Maharaja married Bamba Muller, and the couple had 6 children: Prince Victor, Prince Frederick, Princess Bamba, Princess Catherine, Princess Sophia, and Prince Albert Edward. Princess Sophia was to become Queen Victoria's goddaughter. At Elvedon, young Sophia spent much of her time outdoors, playing with her younger brother Edward, rearing dogs and riding ponies. Meanwhile, Dalip Singh was spending much of his time between London and Elvedon, building a case against the British government for illegally seizing his private property when his kingdom was annexed to British India.
Dalip Singh had asked for a trial of his financial affairs, and once again he was refused, and he thought, well, that's it, enough's enough. He sold most of his possessions, like his furnishings, his silver art collection, and he sold many of these through the London auction houses, and took his children, and from Gravesend he went off to India.
On the 31st of March 1886, the family set sail for Punjab. But when their ship docked at the port of Aden, the British government, who had been against the plan from the start, made sure that they were denied passage to India. A furious Dalip Singh sent his family back to England while he planned his next move.
It's only when the ship docked at Aden that the authorities had been informed to stop the Maharaja from proceeding to the Punjab. And here he was effectively arrested. It just so happened in the summer months he fell very ill, and the British felt if he died whilst under house arrest, it would have been terrible. So the British doctor said, look, the Maharaja needs to be moved to a cooler climate for his health reasons. The best destination for him was Paris. Here, a whole disarray of anti-British organisations met up with the Maharaja. So we had the Irish rebel Fenians, the French underworld, German intelligence was keeping an eye on him, and even the agents of the Russian king sent an agent to him. While the Maharaja arrived in Paris, Maharani Bamba, her daughters, including Sophia, and their sons, arrived back in England.
Back in the UK, Maharani Bamba and the children moved into the Maharaja's old London residence at Holland Park. Times were hard. Maharani Bamba had succumbed to depression, and Princess Sophia contracted typhoid.
Her mother, Maharani Bamba, stayed back and prayed beside her daughter's bedside all night. And in the morning, little Sophia had recovered, but sadly, her mother had fallen into a coma and died days later.
After Maharani Bamba's death, the 3 princesses and Edward were placed under the care of Arthur Oliphant, whose family had cared for the young Dalip Singh. In 1890, the Maharaja, who had by now given up hope of reclaiming Punjab, returned to England to be with his children. The thought of Dalip Singh's permanent return worried Arthur Oliphant, who had tried very hard to give Sophia and Edward a stable life. In April 1893, Edward contracted pneumonia and died at the age of 13. Later in the same year, on the 21st of October 1893, Dalip Singh, whose health was also rapidly deteriorating, suffered an epileptic fit and died alone in his hotel room in Paris. Both father and son were buried beside Maharani Bamba. After their father's death, the princesses were each allocated an allowance of £600 a year. Sophia, now 17 years of age, was also told that she would be able to leave the guardianship of the Oliphants by the 31st of March, 1894. Queen Victoria gave her Faraday House as a grace and favours residence at Hampton Court Palace. Sophia became more involved in high society circles. She attended aristocratic dinner parties and developed her own styles in fashion. She was now a favourite of the elite London society.
Coming from this, really quite challenging background where her mother died when she was very young, she was split up from her siblings and looked after by a foster family. She still had a kind of really clear view of kind of morality and other people who were in need, and was very concerned to support them and look after them. You can see that in her involvement with the fights for women's rights, being involved in the suffrage movement. She wasn't a sort of peripheral figure. She's right there with the big names, the Pankhursts. She's there taking part in the protest by refusing to fill in her census return. And she's right there on Black Friday, this big protest, and witnessed the awful assaults by the police. And in fact, seeing them and immediately having the presence of mind to take down one of the police officers' numbers so she could complain precisely it was this chap who did it. She's using her privilege as a member of the royal family to try to fight for the very poorest and the most vulnerable in society.
Over 1 million Indian soldiers were sent to fight in France on the Western Front during the First World War. About 14,000 of them returned to England wounded and were nursed at the seaside town of Brighton, where the pavilion was transformed into a hospital. Every effort was made to ensure that the Indian soldiers were well looked after and all their individual religious and cultural needs were met.
Like lots of suffragettes, when the First World War broke out, they stopped campaigning and devoted their efforts to the war, and Sophia was no exception. She became a nurse, and we have these wonderful accounts from soldiers who were wounded, maybe in terrible conditions, the mud of the Western Front, and they sort of come to in Brighton Pavilion and look up at this amazing ceiling and then turn and realise that the nurse mopping their brow and caring for them is the granddaughter of Ranjit Singh, the Lion of the Punjab.
One of the fascinating things that has been part of my life, my working life at Ancient House Museum, is the connection with the Dalip Singh family and their stories. The museum was given to the town by Prince Frederick Dalip Singh, the older brother of Sophia, in the 1920s. And it's through this connection with Prince Frederick and his love of history that we have the particular connections with Princess Sophia Dalip Singh. When Prince Frederick died, Sophia and her sisters Catherine and Bamba helped sort out his possessions. He had collected a wonderful array of portraits of people from the East Anglian region. Princess Sophia was responsible for the donation of other material collected by Prince Frederick Dalip Singh, including some of the portraits that we have on display here in the museum. During the 30s and 40s, the sisters would come to Thetford and make sure that these portraits were being looked after well by the borough of Thetford. A former town clerk told me that he was always in slight trepidation when the princesses came, and to make sure that all was in good order.
240mm howitzers were towed at high speed across the highways which Hitler had built for just such purposes, and set in position around Warsaw.
The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 forced Sophia out of her London residence and into Rathenrea, a bungalow in Buckinghamshire. During the war, Sophia took in 4 evacuees, 3 children and their mother.
I was very fortunate to meet the younger sister, Miss Sarbet, from the family many years ago, and she remembered coming to this grand house where everything you could imagine was there for you. They used to be driven to school by their chauffeur. They even had a violin player who was this Austrian Jewish chap who Princess Catherine had brought over from Europe, who would play every dinner for the children, and this left a great impression on all the children's mind throughout their life. The princess kept an Indian parrot by the name of Akbar who would talk, and it was a great delight for the children to mimic and play with this parrot. And it's a lifestyle they remembered throughout their life and for many decades afterwards.
When you're talking about the past, it only makes sense if you bring it down to now. There's Dame Fawcett, there's Sophia before her, and there's where we are now as women, as people struggling for equality. And Sophia was fighting multiple battles. One was against the imperial power and for women's rights. The suffragette and suffragist movement, they were fighting for women's rights, but you know, there were lots of conflicts and they came at it from a different point of view. Working class women had their own needs, the militants versus the accommodators, and we still, all of that plays out now. It's impossible to have a united front, but we're going in the same direction. And if we want to make this work, everybody has to understand all the conflicts within each of us. Somebody asked me, which is worse for you, being a woman or being a woman of colour? And if I'm honest, it's being a woman of colour. But that doesn't mean that being a woman is not important and not a struggle that I am completely part of. These things are really complicated. Instead of separating it all out, we need to come together in a progressive alliance, because if we're not more intelligent and more united, all this history will be wiped out. And I don't think we want that.
Great Britain, following a policy of self-determination of peoples, made plans to give India complete freedom as an independent dominion of the British Commonwealth of Nations. But the question of independence was not simple, for it posed another delicate question: the partition of the subcontinent between Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan.
In 1947, India won her independence. Unfortunately, the land of Sophia's grandfather was torn between India and Pakistan. The following year, on the 22nd of August, Sophia breathed her last at Rathanria at the age of 71.
The Dilip Singh story isn't as widely known as it should be, and particularly the story of the amazing things that Dilip Singh's children did and contributed to this country. But also I think often the suffrage movement, the suffragettes in particular, tend to be pictured as white and middle class. And that's not the case at all. So it's fantastic to have Sophia as this figure who we can prove, we've got records, was part of the movement, and she's standing not only for herself, but also for all the other women of colour who were involved in that movement and struggled so that people like me can vote and aren't really included in the narrative anymore. And that needs to change, and we can be part of that change.